Good evening, dear companions on this ethereal journey. Tonight our thoughts shall meander along a tranquil and unhurried path, delving into the venerable narratives of ancient Greek mythology and the hushed murmurs of voices long since past. These are chronicles that have resonated through the annals of history, gentle and enduring, patiently awaiting moments precisely like this one. I invite you to lower your illumination, nestle comfortably beneath your chosen covering, and permit the cacophony of the day to recede into oblivion. Now, with a deliberate motion, dim the ambient lights, perhaps activating a quiet fan to introduce that subtle, soothing background hum. Let us embark upon our serene perambulation through the majestic peaks of ancient Greece, a realm where sylvan nymphs once confided their innermost secrets to the zephyrs. You find yourself transposed to a sun-dappled mountainside in this classical land, where the morning mist still tenderly embraces the towering pine trees, and the very air is redolent with the fragrant essence of wild herbs and the crisp freshness of dew. It was in this idyllic setting that Echo, long before her essence was reduced to a mere vocal reverberation off the sheer canyon walls, once resided. In those distant days, she was a spirited mountain nymph, her delicate feet seeming to float above the ground, possessing a voice so enchanting it could coax even the most reticent birds from their arboreal sanctuaries. Echo possessed a singular talent, one that, regrettably, often embroiled her in considerable predicaments. She possessed an insatiable propensity for discourse. She could converse, and then converse yet more. This loquaciousness, however, was never delivered in a harsh or disagreeable manner, it must be noted. On the contrary, her voice was exquisitely melodious, possessing a musicality reminiscent of water gracefully flowing over polished stones. Yet once Echo commenced her verbal expressions, she discovered it was an almost insurmountable task to cease. Imagine her, if you will, on any given morning, seated upon a sun-warmed boulder, engaged in lively repartee with her sister nymphs of the mountainside, while her companions might offer a fleeting observation or two concerning the meteorological conditions, or perhaps mention which shepherd had been coaxing the most dulcet melodies from his flute. Echo, with characteristic exuberance, would embark upon elaborate narrative excursions. She would meticulously describe every single cloud adorning the sky, every vibrant blossom unfurling in the verdant meadow, every intriguing chiaroscuro pattern cast by the venerable oak trees. The other nymphs, in truth, harbored no genuine displeasure. Echo's narratives were undeniably captivating, replete with charming minutiae that invariably elicited a smile. She possessed an unparalleled aptitude for discerning details that others frequently overlooked. The delicate pause a butterfly made to meticulously cleanse its wings, or the subtle chromatic shifts in the light as it filtered through the varied foliage. However, there existed one particular goddess who found Echo's ceaseless prattle rather inconvenient and at times infuriating. Hera, the august consort of Zeus, had cultivated a profound suspicion of mountain nymphs. You see, Zeus, in his customary fashion, possessed an unfortunate predilection for discreetly departing from the Olympian heights to indulge in dalliances with various nymphs, and Hera had, over time, developed an astonishing proficiency for tracking his clandestine movements. She would invariably arrive at a secluded mountain grove or a sylvan clearing, poised to apprehend Zeus in the very act of whatever amorous mischief he was orchestrating. But Echo, entirely without malicious intent, had inadvertently become Zeus's most fortuitous confederate. Whenever Hera made her formidable appearance, her countenance stern and her demeanor resolute, Echo would greet her with unbridled cheerfulness. "O most magnificent Hera, what an utterly splendid morning this truly is! Have you observed how the nascent sunlight artfully catches the myriad dewdrops upon that intricate spiderweb? And do listen to that exquisite avian melody. I posit it is a thrush, though it is conceivable it might be a lark. The timbre of its song possesses a subtle divergence from yesterday's dawn chorus. Would you not agree?" By the time Echo concluded her enthusiastic and detailed observations regarding the morning's splendors, Zeus had invariably, and with utmost discretion, absconded, leaving Hera to offer a polite, if strained, smile to the incessantly chattering nymph, while her elusive quarry once again evaded her grasp. This particular scenario transpired on more than one isolated occasion. Indeed, it occurred with such frequency that Hera began to harbor a growing suspicion that Echo was orchestrating these diversions with deliberate intent. The unadulterated truth, however, was considerably simpler. Echo possessed a genuine and profound affection for conversation, and she was, in all sincerity, utterly delighted to encounter anyone, even an occasionally irascible goddess, upon her beloved mountain. Yet Hera had finally reached the absolute limit of her patience with these clever stratagems and conveniently timed distractions. One fateful morning, after Zeus had once again vanished into thin air while Echo was elaborating upon the utterly fascinating manner in which the morning shadows gracefully traversed the valley, Hera turned to the still chattering nymph, a formidable decision having solidified in her divine mind. "Echo," she articulated, and there was an arresting quality in her voice that finally compelled the mountain nymph to cease her ceaseless discourse. "You appear to possess an extraordinary fondness for words, but from this moment forward, you shall only be capable of employing the words that others first utter to you." It was a malediction pronounced with the full, unassailable force of divine authority, and it descended upon Echo with the oppressive weight of a heavy shroud. She parted her lips, intending to protest, to elucidate that she had harbored no malevolent intentions, that she simply derived immense pleasure from engaging in spirited conversation, but no sound, no word materialized. She could only wait, her senses acutely attuned, hoping that someone else would speak, so that she might then borrow their utterances and artfully reconfigure them into her own responsive pronouncements. The other nymphs, at first, failed to comprehend the gravity of the situation. They called out to Echo, their voices laced with concern, inquiring as to her distress, as to what ailment afflicted her. And Echo, in her newfound predicament, could only reiterate their very questions back to them. What was wrong? Why did she look distressed? But she possessed no means of explanation, no capacity to articulate her plight. Days bled into weeks. Echo gradually assimilated the vexing constraints of her new, diminished existence. She could seize the concluding words someone had spoken and return them, a mere reflection. But she was utterly incapable of initiating dialogues, unable to impart her keen observations regarding the shifting nuances of light or the intriguing configurations of clouds. The mountain, once vibrant with her voice, now felt immeasurably quieter, imbued with a profound sense of loneliness, even though she remained encompassed by the very same sister nymphs she had always known. It was during this period of arduous adjustment to enforced silence that Narcissus made his indelible appearance upon her mountain. He was a youth of perhaps 16, or possibly 17, possessing a countenance of such striking comeliness that it compelled all who beheld him to pause and gaze in awe. His hair, like spun gold, seemed to capture and radiate the very essence of the sunlight, and his eyes were the profound blue-green hue of pristine mountain lakes. He navigated the sylvan expanse with an inherent grace, moving as if he were an intrinsic part of the wilderness, confident and effortlessly elegant. Yet there was an unmistakable chill accompanying his beauty, an elusive quality that rendered him utterly untouchable. When other young individuals endeavored to cultivate his acquaintance, he would regard them with a mild, almost imperceptible disdain, as if they were somehow beneath his discerning notice. When they openly expressed their profound admiration or fervent affection, he would merely offer a laugh, not precisely cruel, but imbued with a dismissiveness that left them feeling insignificant and utterly foolish. Echo observed him from her elevated vantage point on the mountainside and experienced an emotion she had never before encountered. It was not solely his unparalleled beauty that captivated her, though he was, without question, breathtakingly handsome. It was the seamless manner in which he moved through her cherished forest, with such effortless self-assurance. The way he appeared to intrinsically belong within the wild, untamed realms that she so adored. She trailed him with meticulous care, moving quietly, her mind desperately attempting to devise a strategy for approaching someone when her linguistic capabilities were confined to mere borrowed words. She watched him kneel by a pristine stream to quench his thirst, observed him pause to meticulously examine a particularly rare and unusual flower. He seemed utterly absorbed in his own profound cogitations, so completely content within his own solitary company. Finally, he perceived that he was being observed. "Who's there?" he called out, his gaze sweeping towards the dense cluster of trees where Echo lay concealed. "There," Echo responded, for those were the only words within her restricted lexicon. Narcissus furrowed his brow, his gaze now more intently scrutinizing his surroundings. "Come out," he commanded. "Show yourself." "Show yourself," Echo reiterated, stepping partially into view, yet maintaining a sufficient distance to obscure her form from his immediate clear perception. This peculiar exchange persisted for several protracted minutes, with Narcissus's frustration steadily mounting and Echo's desperation intensifying with each passing moment. She yearned to elucidate her identity, to recount to him the myriad wonders of the mountain, to share with him all the exquisite details she had discerned during his perambulation through her forest. But all she could manage was to echo his own words back to him, a cruel and mocking reflection. When she finally emerged fully into the sun-dappled clearing, revealing her complete form, Narcissus regarded her with the identical cool dismissal he had previously bestowed upon all others. She was undeniably beautiful, yes, as mountain nymphs invariably were, but he appeared utterly unmoved by her striking comeliness, entirely uninterested in her palpable admiration. "I have no time for games," he declared, and with that he turned to depart. "Time for games," Echo repeated, her voice laced with desperation, her hand reaching out towards him in an involuntary gesture. But he was already striding away, leaving her utterly alone in the clearing, accompanied only by his borrowed words and the profound ache of unrequited rejection. She watched him vanish between the verdant trees, carrying with him the nascent stirrings of love she had ever felt, completely oblivious to the precious gift he was so carelessly spurning. From that sorrowful day forward, Echo commenced a gradual process of dissolution, not abruptly, but slowly, inexorably, much like morning mist gently dissipated by the encroaching sunlight. The other nymphs observed with increasing apprehension as their sister became progressively more translucent, spending her days perched upon rocks and precipices, her gaze fixed upon the distant horizon. She was inexorably transforming into that which profound grief and unfulfilled longing can render us when we are bereft of the words to articulate our anguish. A disembodied voice, an echo utterly devoid of its original sound. Soon, all that remained of the vibrant nymph who had once imbued the mountain with her cheerful and ceaseless chatter was her voice, eternally condemned to reiterate the final words spoken by others. But this, as we know, is not yet the conclusive chapter of this unfolding narrative, is it? For Narcissus continued his heedless peregrinations, persevering in his established pattern of cold rejection, never quite grasping that the fundamental flaw did not reside within those who offered him their affection, but rather within his own profound inability to cherish anyone other than himself. And the vigilant gods, who possess an uncanny awareness of such mortal failings, were assiduously taking note of his self-absorbed conduct. What then do you surmise transpires when an individual utterly incapable of love encounters their own captivating reflection? The day was steadily growing warmer, and he had been ascending a gradual incline through the dense enclosing woods for a considerable period. His tunic clung uncomfortably to his back, moistened by perspiration, and his throat felt parched and scratchy. When he discerned the faint, soothing sound of water ahead, not the tumultuous rush of a vigorous stream, but rather the more delicate, gentle lapping of water against smooth stones, he experienced a profound surge of relief. Narcissus had been walking for interminable hours, his mind adrift, paying scant attention to the direction his feet were carrying him. This was, in fact, his customary mode of being. He moved through the world, his focus intently inward, engrossed in his own profound thoughts, silently admiring his own inherent grace, barely registering the intrinsic beauty that encompassed him, unless by some remarkable coincidence it somehow served to mirror his own exquisite form. That very question regarding reflection now guides us deeper into the sylvan heart of the forest, where the ancient trees grow with an unparalleled density, and the sunlight filters down in magnificent, ethereal, golden columns, thereby conjuring a world that feels utterly distinct and separate from the mundane passage of ordinary time, separate from the usual flow of time. Such natural springs were a familiar sight across the rugged Greek mountain ranges, perpetually nourished by subterranean currents that ensured the water remained refreshingly cool and pristine, even amidst the sweltering intensity of summer's embrace. Frequently, these serene locations were revered as sacred sanctuaries, believed to be the dwelling places of ethereal nymphs or sites where weary travelers might leave modest votive offerings to secure safe passage on their journeys. The particular pool he stumbled upon possessed an impeccable circular form, as though expertly scooped out by an immense unseen utensil. It reposed within a secluded glade, where the surrounding trees formed a perfect natural enclosure, their boughs gracefully arching overhead, their fingertips of foliage nearly touching. The water's surface was so remarkably placid, it resembled burnished bronze, flawlessly mirroring the expanse of the sky and the verdant canopy of leaves with crystalline precision. Yet Narcissus harbored no thoughts of hallowed grounds, mythical nymphs, or ritualistic tributes. He simply perceived pure water and felt a profound sense of gratitude. He knelt at the pool's brink upon the smooth, worn stones that encircled it, cupped his hands, and quenched his thirst deeply. The water was invigoratingly cold and wonderfully sweet, precisely what his parched body desperately craved. Therefore, when Narcissus first beheld that visage within the crystalline depths of the pool, a face so youthful and exquisitely beautiful, framed by golden tresses that artfully captured the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves, and possessing eyes the profound hue of ancient forest pools, his initial reaction was not, "Ah, that is my own reflection." Instead, his immediate inquiry was, "Who is this stunning individual, and why do they inhabit the water?" One might naturally assume that Narcissus would instantaneously recognize his own mirrored image, but it is crucial to recall that this era predated the widespread availability of mirrors. Individuals in ancient Greece might occasionally catch a fleeting glimpse of themselves in highly polished bronze or silver, but such reflective surfaces were both prohibitively expensive and exceedingly scarce. The vast majority of people navigated their entire existence with only a nebulous understanding of their physical appearance, relying on verbal descriptions from others or transient glimpses in tranquil bodies of water. It was only as he paused to regain his breath that his gaze fell upon the countenance staring back at him from the liquid surface. "Hello," he softly intoned to the face suspended in the water. He shifted his head imperceptibly, and the face in the water mimicked his movement. He raised his hand, and the hand within the water ascended in perfect synchronicity. For a fleeting instant, comprehension seemed within his grasp, but the face was so utterly captivating, so flawlessly perfect, that he could scarcely believe it could possibly be his own. Instead, he persuaded himself that he was encountering a water nymph, one of those enchanting entities rumored to dwell in the myriad springs and pools scattered throughout the mountainous terrain. This fanciful explanation, he reasoned, would account for the impeccable beauty, the enigmatic manifestation, and the peculiar manner in which the figure appeared to subsist just beneath the water's placid exterior. He extended his hand towards the water, intending to caress that flawless face, and his fingers breached the surface, instantly shattering the ethereal image into concentric ripples. Frantically, he withdrew his hand, patiently awaiting the water's return to stillness, for the magnificent visage to re-emerge. He offered a smile, and the face reciprocated with a radiant expression that caused his heart to quicken its beat. Never before had he witnessed anyone so breathtakingly beautiful, so utterly perfect. In comparison to this exquisite creature, every other individual who had ever professed affection for him seemed mundane and unremarkable. This, he concluded, was the very essence of true beauty. The lips in the reflection moved, seemingly whispering in return, though no audible sound reached his ears. This only solidified his conviction that he was observing a bashful nymph, perhaps one capable of communicating solely through silent gestures. When the image finally reformed, he experienced such a profound sense of relief that he nearly chuckled aloud. "Do not be afraid," he softly murmured. "I will not cause you any harm." Hours elapsed without his conscious awareness. He exhausted every conceivable method of communication with the water nymph, striving to persuade her to ascend from her watery domain and engage him in proper conversation. He employed a series of gestures, uttered gentle words, and even ventured a small song, an act he had never performed for any of the flesh-and-blood individuals who had pursued him. The lips moved once more, articulating unspoken words. The eyes gazed directly into his with an expression of such profound yearning, such perfect comprehension, that he felt as though his heart might indeed rupture. As the sun traversed the firmament, casting shifting patterns of illumination and shadow around the tranquil pool, Narcissus's desperation intensified. This, he finally understood, was love. This agonizing yearning, this pervasive sensation that nothing else in the world held any significance save for proximity to this singular, perfect being. This was the profound emotion all those other individuals had striven to convey to him. Yet each time he reached for her, his touch dispersed her into fleeting ripples. Each time he leaned down to bestow a kiss, his lips met only the frigid water. She was undeniably present, so vividly manifest, responding to his every expression with impeccable understanding. But she remained simultaneously intangible, forever beyond his grasp. However, comprehending love and being capable of fulfilling its desires proved to be vastly different realities. He found himself unable to depart from the pool's edge. Each time the thought crossed his mind, he would cast his gaze upon that exquisite face and perceive what appeared to be panic, reflected in those perfect eyes. She clearly needed him. It was evident she was attempting to convey something of immense importance. If he abandoned her, he feared he might never encounter her again. Days unfolded in this agonizing manner. He drank sparingly from the pool when thirst compelled him, always exercising meticulous caution to disturb the surface as little as possible. He snatched fitful moments of sleep, his head cushioned by his arms, but invariably awakened to ensure his beloved remained present. The sun descended, yet he continued to kneel by the water. His knees became stiff from the unyielding stones. His back ached from his perpetually forward-leaning posture, but he found himself utterly unable to tear himself away. Under the moon's gentle glow, the face in the water appeared even more ethereal, more profoundly magical. The forest nymphs observed this peculiar vigil with mounting apprehension. They recognized the ominous signs of a divine malediction, the consuming obsession, the gradual physical deterioration, the complete severance from everything that had once sustained life. Some among them whispered that he deserved this fate, recalling his aloofness, his casual cruelty towards those who had cherished him. Yet, others felt a pang of pity. After all, he was now experiencing the very torment he had inflicted upon others, the agony of loving someone who could never reciprocate that affection, the desperate craving for something that remained perpetually just beyond reach. Echo was counted among those who watched, though she was by then little more than a disembodied voice, a faint whisper carried on the breeze. When Narcissus spoke to his reflection, she sometimes caught fragments of his words and returned them to him from the surrounding rocks and trees. "Beautiful," he would softly utter. "And beautiful," the mountain would gently echo back. "Why won't you come to me?" He would plead, and the echo would reiterate, "Come to me, come to me." Ultimately, he simply wasted away, much as Echo had before him. Some accounts suggest his body dissolved into the earth surrounding the pool, enriching the soil. Others posit that he underwent a complete transformation, becoming something entirely new, an entity capable of existing in both terrestrial and celestial realms, rooted in the earth yet aspiring towards the heavens. But as days inexorably transitioned into weeks, it became painfully evident that no such union would ever materialize. Narcissus grew gaunt, his once golden hair lank and dull, his flawless skin pallid from insufficient sunlight and nourishment. Still, he could not wrench himself away from the pool, could not cease gazing at the face that returned his gaze with such perfect, heartbreaking understanding. Perhaps he perceived those echoes and mistakenly believed them to be his water nymph attempting to communicate with him from her aquatic domain. Perhaps they instilled within him a glimmer of hope, that she was indeed listening, that she cared, that one day she might discover a means to join him on solid ground. What emerged in that precise location beside the placid water, where a young man had succumbed to an infatuation with love itself. From that tranquil pool, where the first flowers of its kind blossomed, we can discern something intriguing if we listen with attentiveness. It speaks to the remarkable manner in which sound traversed the ancient world, conveying messages in ways the Greeks comprehended far more profoundly than we might anticipate. Imagine yourself traversing the majestic mountains of ancient Greece on a crisp, clear morning, and all around you, myriad voices resonate, calling back and forth. Not precisely human voices, but something remarkably akin. The distinct sound of your footsteps upon the rocky path returns to you from the sheer cliff faces, amplified and multiplied. When you project a greeting to test the acoustic phenomenon, your own words come rushing back, sometimes with pristine clarity, sometimes fragmented into syllables that seem to form an entirely different idiom. For the ancient Greeks, these were not merely fascinating acoustic occurrences. They represented genuine conversations with the unseen inhabitants of the landscape, communications from the spirits believed to reside within rocks, trees, and towering mountain peaks. Each echo possessed its own narrative, and every narrative bore a name. The very term echo itself derives from the appellation of our particular mountain nymph. However, the Greeks possessed a rich lexicon of distinct words to describe the various ways sound could travel and subsequently return. There was antiphona, the responsive voice that reverberated from temple walls during sacred religious observances. There was ketchos, the sound that appeared to descend from elevated places, akin to pronouncements from the gods themselves. Greek architects, remarkably, possessed a more sophisticated understanding of these acoustic principles than one might assume. When they engineered their magnificent theaters, meticulously carved into hillsides in perfect semicircles, they were crafting venues where even the softest whisper from the stage could reach the uppermost rows of seating. But they were simultaneously creating spaces where the very landscape itself became an integral component of the performance. Envision yourself seated in the theater at Epidaurus on a balmy evening, witnessing a profound tragedy unfold on the stage below. The actor portraying Oedipus cries out in an agony of despair, and his voice ascends through the stone tiers, reaches the distant mountains beyond, and then returns to you transformed, softened, imbued with an air of mystery by the intervening distance and stone. For a fleeting moment, it sounds as though the gods themselves are offering commentary on the unfolding action, adding their own divine voices to the poignant human drama. The ancient Greeks possessed a profound understanding of how echoes infused the human experience with a sense of the divine. It was no mere happenstance. They held a deep conviction that echoes served as a conduit through which celestial beings communicated with mortals. Consequently, when one's utterances reverberated from the hallowed confines of a sacred grove or a venerable temple wall, it was interpreted as the god's direct acknowledgement of one's supplications, a divine recognition of an individual's presence within the sacred landscape. Shepherds, whose lives unfolded amidst the rugged mountain terrain, cultivated their own intricate rapport with these acoustic phenomena. They would address their flocks using distinct vocalizations, elongated and sustained notes specifically chosen for their exceptional carrying capacity, which the surrounding rock formations would capture and amplify with remarkable fidelity. Over the passage of time, these astute pastoralists developed an innate ability to decipher the topography through sound, discerning which valleys would absorb their calls into an ethereal silence, and which precipices would return their voices with heightened vigor and clarity. Children, nurtured within these secluded mountain hamlets, quickly assimilated the notion that echoes possessed discernible personalities. The reverberation emanating from the ancient olive grove, for instance, presented a distinctly different acoustic signature than the one returned from the marble quarry. Some echoes were characterized by their swift and incisive nature, returning words almost instantaneously, before the speaker had fully articulated them. In contrast, other echoes exhibited a languid and ethereal quality, cradling syllables for several protracted heartbeats, before gently releasing them back into the ambient air. The echo originating from the sacred spring, a site believed to be the dwelling place of Echo herself, boasted an utterly unique character. Travelers frequently recounted how this particular echo seemed to dwell upon certain words with deliberate emphasis, especially those pertaining to themes of affection, profound yearning, and the poignant ache of being misunderstood. On occasion, they reported, it would seize upon a solitary word from a more extensive utterance and reiterate it multiple times, as if imbuing it with extraordinary significance and weight. Musicians and poets, with their heightened sensibilities, accorded particular reverence to these intrinsic acoustic attributes. A bard, in the nascent stages of composing a fresh melody, would conscientiously test its resonance in a myriad of locales, intently observing how the echoes subtly transmuted the rhythmic cadence and semantic essence of his lyrical expressions. Certain verses, which might have appeared rather unremarkable when recited in an ordinary chamber, would undergo a profound metamorphosis when intoned from a mountainside, the returning echoes weaving intricate harmonies and counterpoints that the original composer had never even contemplated. The illustrious poet Pindar famously penned verses about his poetic rivalry with echoes, striving to craft lines that would achieve an even greater splendor when they returned, artistically transformed by the immutable stone and the vast expanse of distance. He eloquently articulated the formidable challenge of composing for a dual audience. The corporeal individuals gathered around him and the ethereal, unseen spirits who would intercept his utterances and return them in an altered guise. Religious rites frequently incorporated these acoustic marvels with deliberate intention. Priests would strategically position themselves at vantage points where their intoned prayers would reverberate from the expansive temple walls, thereby fostering the powerful illusion of divine voices harmoniously joining in the sacred act of worship. The devout congregants would experience their own chanted responses returned to them, intricately layered and manifold, causing even a modest assembly to sound akin to an immense celestial choir. During the enigmatic mysteries conducted at Eleusis, those clandestine religious ceremonies that promised initiates a fleeting glimpse into the afterlife, a pivotal component of the transformative journey involved meticulously orchestrated acoustic effects. Participants would perceive voices seemingly emanating from subterranean depths, from the boundless sky, and from every conceivable direction simultaneously. The echoes conspired to forge an otherworldly soundscape that powerfully persuaded many that they were, in truth, engaged in direct communion with the gods. Yet, echoes were not universally embraced or always perceived as benevolent. Certain localities acquired notoriety for their troublesome acoustic properties. The echo situated at a particular crossroads near Athens, for instance, was reputed to pervert words into their polar opposites, thereby converting a heartfelt blessing into a malevolent curse and a cordial greeting into an ominous warning. Prudent travelers learned to traverse such perilous locations in profound silence, rather than hazard the risk of having their spoken words turned against them with dire consequences. The bustling marketplace in Athens presented its own unique set of acoustic challenges. With hundreds of vendors simultaneously hawking their diverse merchandise, the cacophony of sound would rebound off the surrounding edifices, returning as an utterly indecipherable roar. Astute customers learned to navigate their shopping endeavors through an intricate system of gestures as much as through vocal negotiation, pointing at desired commodities and raising fingers to convey prices, rather than attempting to shout above the pervasive acoustic pandemonium. In stark contrast, the magnificent library at Alexandria was meticulously conceived and constructed to attenuate echoes, thereby creating serene spaces where erudite scholars could engage in hushed conversations without their discussions reverberating off the walls and disrupting other diligent readers. The architects employed luxurious tapestries and ingeniously shaped columns to absorb sound rather than reflect it, thereby fashioning secluded pockets of profound quietude within the vibrant confines of a bustling metropolis. Greek philosophers were deeply engrossed by the profound metaphysical ramifications of echoes. If a word uttered in an empty valley returned to the speaker, did this constitute a genuine conversation with oneself? Were echoes irrefutable evidence that the past possessed the capacity to articulate itself to the present? Plato, the eminent philosopher, eloquently characterized echoes as mere shadows of sound, imperfect facsimiles of an original truth, much akin to his celebrated allegory of prisoners observing shadows flickering on a cavern wall. Aristotle, adopting a more pragmatic stance, meticulously investigated the intricate physics governing the propagation and return of sound waves. Nevertheless, even his rigorous scientific observations were imbued with the overarching understanding that echoes transcended mere acoustic phenomena. They constituted an intrinsic component of the dynamic, living dialogue between humanity and the grand tapestry of the natural world. As the dusk descends gracefully upon the mountains, and one finds oneself retracing steps through those very valleys where Echo once engaged in joyous converse with her sisters, a curious observation might emerge. The echoes appear to undergo a subtle transformation in the encroaching twilight, becoming softer, imbued with an almost contemplative quality. One's own footsteps return as if a gentle conversation, and when one pauses to listen intently, the ensuing silence feels pregnant with waiting voices. What profound insights might those voices be poised to impart to us, if only we possessed the wisdom to listen with true understanding? These evocative waiting voices belong to entities intimately familiar to the ancient Greeks, not as distant, abstract mythological figures, but as integral neighbors, woven into the very fabric of daily existence, as tangible and ever-present as the trees they inhabited, and the life-giving streams they diligently safeguarded. Imagine awakening in a quaint Greek village, precisely as the nascent sun begins to caress the distant hilltops. Your day commences, as did most days in the ancient Hellenic world, with a heightened awareness of the unseen community that shares your immediate environment. Before you proceed to draw water from the village well, you instinctively pause to acknowledge the naiad believed to reside within its depths. Before you embark upon your journey through the venerable oak grove en route to the fields, you offer a respectful nod to the dryads who consider those majestic trees their cherished abode. This practice is not merely an act of superstition, though it might appear so to contemporary sensibilities. Rather, it is a profound expression of courtesy. The same degree of politeness and deference extended to human neighbors was invariably extended to the spirits who shared and animated the surrounding landscape. The Greeks inherently understood that they were never truly isolated within the natural world, that every significant geographical feature of their environment possessed its own distinct resident consciousness. Nymphs were ubiquitous, as prevalent as the wildflowers that carpeted the countryside, and just as diverse in their manifestations. The Oreads made their dwellings in the majestic mountains, gracefully dancing upon the lofty peaks in the soft glow of the early morning light. The Nereids inhabited the boundless sea, elegantly riding upon the backs of dolphins and benevolently guiding mariners through treacherous waters. The Hamadryads were inextricably bound to specific trees. When their cherished oak, ash, or olive tree withered and perished, they too met their inevitable demise. The Potamides resided in the meandering rivers, and the Limnades in the tranquil lakes. Each distinct category of nymph possessed her own unique personality, her own particular predilections, and her own characteristic modes of interaction with the human inhabitants who shared her designated territory. The nymphs of the mountains tended to be wild and exuberantly free-spirited, more inclined towards playful, harmless mischief than towards offering direct, tangible assistance. The nymphs of the water were generally perceived as more benevolent and helpful, yet they were also known to be considerably more temperamental. To incur the displeasure of one might result in one's well inexplicably running dry or one's fishing nets consistently returning devoid of any catch. A quintessential Greek farmer possessed an intimate knowledge of the nymphs inhabiting his land, a familiarity as profound as his understanding of his human neighbors. He could readily inform you which particular spring was home to an exceptionally generous naiad who would unfailingly ensure a bountiful flow of water, provided one consistently offered her sporadic tributes of fresh flowers or delectable honeycakes. He knew precisely which sacred grove was under the guardianship of dryads who preferred to be approached in the gentle hours of the morning rather than the fading light of evening, and which winding mountain path was vigilantly watched over by an Oread who derived immense pleasure from hearing travelers sing as they journeyed. Children were raised immersed in captivating narratives about local nymphs, much in the same way modern children might grow up hearing anecdotes about the family residing across the street. "Wow, do not pluck flowers from the verdant meadow situated behind the temple," a mother might admonish her daughter. That is the dwelling place of the Anthusai, and they become quite perturbed when individuals disturb their cherished garden. Or, should you ever become disoriented in the dense woods, seek out a stream and faithfully follow its course. The Potamides will graciously guide you home if you make your request with polite reverence. These were not abstract, ethereal beings from antiquated myths. They were a vibrant, integral part of the community, possessing discernible relationships, distinct preferences, and fluctuating moods that harmonized with the changing seasons. The dryad who resided within the majestic oak tree by the village gate might radiate cheerfulness and a welcoming demeanor in the blossoming spring, when her tree was unfurling its new leaves, but she might succumb to a profound melancholy in the autumn, as her leaves began their inevitable descent. Young individuals, in particular, cultivated profound personal relationships with nymphs. A young girl embarking upon the art of weaving might assiduously leave small offerings at a shrine dedicated to the nymphs who presided over textile craftsmanship, imploring them to guide her nimble fingers and assist her in creating exquisite cloth. A young boy learning the arduous skill of hunting might earnestly seek the favor of the Oreds, who possessed an intimate knowledge of every game trail traversing the mountains, and could thereby ensure his safe return home with sustenance for his family. One individual, having completed his day's endeavors, made his way homeward, bearing provisions to nourish his household. This simple act underscored the intricate reliance of humans on the natural world, a connection often mediated by the unseen presences inhabiting the ancient landscapes. Marriage customs, for instance, frequently saw nymphs playing a pivotal role in nuptial traditions. Prospective brides journeyed to a venerated local spring before their wedding, imploring the resident naiad to bestow blessings of fecundity and marital bliss upon their impending union. They performed ablutions in the numinous waters, presented votive gifts such as precious adornments or fragrant essences, and occasionally, the eve of their wedding day was dedicated to an extended vigil, engaging in profound, whispered communion with the ethereal entity, openly articulating their aspirations and apprehensions regarding their matrimonial journey. Agriculturalists meticulously structured their routines and seasonal labors around hallowed observances dedicated to the nymphs. Specific days were consecrated to revering the dryads, the tree nymphs. During these hallowed periods, all arboreal maintenance, including the vital tasks of pruning and harvesting, was strictly abstained from. Instead, fruit-bearing groves and woodlands were adorned with vibrant streamers and freshly gathered blossoms, transforming them into celebratory spectacles. Conversely, distinct days were solemnly allocated to the veneration of the naiads, the aquatic nymphs. On these occasions, every communal wellspring and subterranean fount underwent meticulous cleansing and received sacred benedictions. Concurrently, intimate celebratory gatherings and minor festivities transpired along the banks of flowing streams and winding rivers, expressing profound gratitude for the life-giving waters. The demarcation lines separating the ethereal domains of the nymphs from the terrestrial habitations of humanity were, for the most part, comprehensively comprehended and scrupulously honored. Universal consensus affirmed that particular sylvan groves possessed an inherent sanctity. Specific hydrological sources were unequivocally forbidden from defilement, and designated mountain summits served as the exclusive private choreographic venues for the Oreds, the mountain nymphs. Transgressing these sacrosanct frontiers was not merely an act of impertinence, it carried perilous ramifications. Indeed, an ethereal guardian whose cherished abode had been desecrated or physically compromised possessed the formidable capacity to inflict considerable hardship and adversity upon the human transgressors. However, the intricate relationship between mortals and these nature spirits extended beyond mere deference and the avoidance of transgression. When accorded appropriate reverence, nymphs frequently emerged as formidable and benevolent allies. Their inherent wisdom encompassed intimate knowledge of the choicest locations for wild apiaries, the identification of flora possessing potent therapeutic virtues, and the precise courses where aquatic conduits flowed with pristine clarity and profound depth. Consequently, a skilled hunter who had successfully cultivated an amicable rapport with the indigenous dryads could discover that vital game trails materialized serendipitously at opportune moments, or that his projectiles achieved enhanced accuracy and trajectory when he pursued quarry within their sylvan dominion. Pastoralists, tending their herds across diverse landscapes, forged exceptionally intimate connections with the myriad nymphs inhabiting the grazing grounds of their flocks. These attentive caretakers cultivated a nuanced understanding of subtle environmental cues that betrayed the disposition of a nymph. For instance, an extraordinarily vivacious chorus of avian melodies could signify the dryad's joyous and frolicsome inclination, while an unforeseen shroud of vapor ascending from a watercourse might indicate that the naiads were immersed in pensive reflection and desired undisturbed solitude. A select few shepherds achieved widespread renown for their extraordinary aptitude in communicating with these ethereal beings. Their unique expertise rendered them indispensable when individuals sought to broker safe transit through highly hallowed domains, or when entire settlements required elucidation regarding an abrupt alteration in the behavior of their indispensable local spring. Consequently, these remarkable individuals, predominantly men but sometimes women, functioned as invaluable unofficial envoys, mediating complex interactions between the mortal and nymphic realms. The annual cycle of seasonal festivities frequently revolved around elaborate commemorations dedicated to the nymphs. Vernal celebrations specifically venerated the reawakening and return of the dryads from their period of hibernal slumber. On these occasions, whole communities congregated within hallowed woodlands, engaging in communal singing, spirited dancing, and the convivial sharing of sustenance. Estival festivities, in contrast, directed their focus toward the aquatic naiads. These included vigorous swimming contests and exhilarating boat regattas, meticulously orchestrated as expressions of profound gratitude for the spirits who diligently maintained the ceaseless flow of rivers and the abundant replenishment of wells. The advent of autumn ushered in a series of more melancholic observances, recognizing the inherent sorrow of the dryads as their arboreal charges prepared for their winter cessation of growth. In a poignant ritual, communities collected fallen foliage into meticulously arranged ceremonial mounds, which they embellished with late-season blossoms and flickering candles, fashioning aesthetically pleasing tributes that acknowledged the nymphs' cyclical relinquishment and afforded their beloved trees a period of restorative repose. The frigid embrace of winter marked the most subdued period for nymph-centric engagements, though it was by no means devoid of spiritual interaction. individuals thoughtfully placed diminutive offerings at the dormant bases of trees, conveying heartfelt appreciation to the dryads for their vigilant safeguarding throughout the verdant growing season, and earnestly beseeching their secure reappearance with the advent of spring. Furthermore, the practice of ice fishing invariably necessitated meticulous preliminary discussions and overtures with any naiads whose liquid domains had succumbed to the crystalline grip of frost, thereby guaranteeing that the act of perforating the frozen surface would not be construed as an inimical or intrusive gesture. The influence of nymphic territories permeated even the most significant political stratagems and military deliberations. Before embarking on the architectural designs for novel thoroughfares or intricate aqueduct systems, urban centers invariably sought the counsel of indigenous priests, individuals possessing specialized expertise in nymphic diplomacy, to ensure that the proposed construction would not inflict harm upon vital hallowed groves or pristine springs. Similarly, military strategists, when formulating their campaign routes, occasionally opted for circuitous paths that circumvented recognized nymphic sanctuaries, recognizing implicitly that the benevolent disposition of the indigenous spirits often held greater strategic import than the mere expediency of shortening a day's journey. As one prepares for slumber within the embrace of this antique epoch, attuning to the soughing whisper of the wind through the arboreal canopy beyond the casement, one might discern what appears to be faint, melodious laughter, or possibly a delicate, ethereal canticle. The dryads, too, are embarking upon their nocturnal repose, engaging in hushed confidences regarding the day's occurrences, exchanging anecdotal observations about the mortal inhabitants they have scrutinized, and thoughtfully conceiving minor acts of benevolence for the forthcoming dawn. One is compelled to ponder the profound divergence in our contemporary rapport with the natural environment. Were we to retain a vestige of faith in such unseen denizens, and consistently allocate moments to acknowledge the intrinsic genius loci, the spirits inherent to every locale. This introspective query regarding the inherent spirits of specific locales invariably guides our contemplation toward the most hallowed precincts within the ancient Hellenic civilization. These were typically serene, limpid pools where the Earth's concealed hydrological veins breached the surface, emerging into the illuminating embrace of the sun's rays. In such numinous sites, the ethereal veil separating the mortal realm from the chthonic or divine sphere was perceived to attenuate significantly, and it was here that cryptic utterances emanating from the depths beneath the terrestrial crust had perpetually imparted wisdom to those discerning individuals attuned to their subtle resonance. One might envision oneself positioned alongside a pristine spring, nestled within a venerable grove of age-old olive trees, situated amidst the undulating hills that majestically overlook Delphi. From profound subterranean reservoirs, the water effervesces, pellucid and chilling, coalescing into a modest basin before gracefully cascading onward to engender a sinuous stream, which meanders progressively toward the valley floor. The accompanying auditory experience is one of understated yet unceasing presence, not the tumultuous roar characteristic of a cascading cataract, but rather the measured, enduring articulation of water that has been conversing with the landscape for millennia untold. This specific hydrological source has been revered as sacrosanct for a duration extending beyond the reach of human memory, long prior to the architectural genesis of the magnificent temple dedicated to Apollo in the adjacent valley. Individuals journeyed to this very spot to partake of its waters, to perform ritual ablutions, and to engage in profound auditory contemplation. The water itself possesses a subtle mineral inflection, a delicate testament to the profound telluric strata through which it traversed, en route to the terrestrial surface. Indigenous inhabitants attest to its inherent therapeutic virtues, claiming its efficacy in alleviating cephalic discomforts and assuaging troubled psyches. Beyond its medicinal attributes, popular belief holds that it facilitates oral perception of the esoteric. Hushed intimations of sagacity, elusive fragments of prescience, and reverberating echoes of divine discourse. It is understood that not all individuals are privy to these subtle auditory phenomena, and even those predisposed to hearing them do not experience such revelations on every occasion. The spring, an entity of profound agency, communicates at its own discretion, selecting its chosen recipients, and its pronouncements are frequently sufficiently enigmatic as to necessitate meticulous exegesis. Hydrological sources of this numinous caliber were dispersed across the entire Hellenic expanse, each distinguished by its unique intrinsic essence and renowned public standing. Certain springs garnered acclaim for their restorative aqueous properties, whilst others were celebrated for their oracular pronouncements. The venerable spring at Dodona manifested its communiques through the sylvan rustling of the oak foliage overhanging its waters, generating a distinctive murmuring idiom that the resident priestly order had assiduously mastered the art of interpreting. Conversely, the sacred springs at Lebedea mandated intricate and arduous purification ceremonies as a prerequisite for bestowing prophetic visions upon those who partook of their liquid essence. Preeminent among all these was the illustrious Castalian spring at Delphi, from which the Pythia, the sacred priestess of Apollo, would imbibe prior to her solemn entry into the temple to articulate divine prophecies. The aqueous emanations from this particular spring were widely believed to induce a state of divine frenzy, a transient dissolution of conventional awareness that facilitated the transformation of a mortal voice into a conduit for celestial pronouncements. Yet, one was not required to hold the esteemed position of a renowned priestess to partake in the distinctive enchantment inherent to these hallowed springs. Common individuals approached these sacred sites with mundane concerns. An agriculturalist perturbed by the prospects of his harvest, a maternal figure anxious over an ailing offspring, or a nascent adult deliberating between divergent life trajectories. They would repose beside the flowing waters, occasionally for protracted periods, patiently anticipating the cognitive lucidity that frequently appeared to emanate from the ceaseless murmur of the stream. The accompanying ritual was typically unadorned. One presented a modest votive gift, such as freshly cut blossoms, golden honey, or a scattering of wine consecrated upon the earth, articulated one's query audibly, or at times simply retained it as an unspoken mental petition. Thereafter, one patiently awaited a response, employing not merely the faculty of hearing, but rather engaging any intrinsic capacity within oneself, attuned to the reception of nuanced, ethereal communications. Occasionally, the desired response manifested as an overt vocalization, articulated words that appeared to ascend from the aqueous depths or to emanate as hushed intimations from the encircling arboreal sentinels. More frequently, however, the insight was conveyed as a progressive alteration in perception, a leisurely elucidation of previously convoluted intellectual constructs. The sacred spring did not proffer explicit directives, but rather served as a catalyst, empowering individuals to apprehend their inherent sagacity with enhanced perspicuity. It was a common practice for wayfarers to meticulously integrate visits to hallowed springs into their itinerary planning. For instance, a tradesman embarking on a voyage to a faraway metropolis might intermit his journey at a conveniently located roadside spring, there to supplicate for divine safeguarding throughout his peregrinations. Similarly, a devout pilgrim en route to a prominent temple would invariably halt at lesser shrines interspersed along the route, thereby cultivating a profound spiritual connection with the consecrated topography. Over time, and through successive generations, adolescents confronting momentous existential choices undertook dedicated pilgrimages to specific springs renowned for their guiding wisdom. A young woman grappling with the selection among prospective suitors might elect to pass a nocturnal vigil in slumber beside a spring consecrated to Aphrodite, the goddess of love, earnestly anticipating oniric revelations that would elucidate the most propitious choice for her enduring felicity. Conversely, a young man torn between following in his father's agrarian footsteps or venturing forth to seek prosperity in an urban environment might seek counsel at a spring dedicated to Hermes, the venerable deity of journeys and novel enterprises. Beyond their divinatory and inspirational roles, these sacred springs also functioned as sites of profound recuperation, addressing both corporeal ailments and psychological disquietudes. Individuals would immerse themselves in the consecrated waters, partake of their essence orally, and even transport modest quantities back to their domiciles within specially crafted receptacles. The therapeutic effects were not invariably characterized by dramatic or instantaneous transformation. Rather, they more commonly manifested as a progressive re-establishment of equilibrium, a measured journey back to a state of robust health and integral completeness. The journey back to complete well-being and inner peace was often a gradual, unhurried process. Each annual cycle brought its own assembly of recurring visitors to these hallowed springs. A venerable matriarch, for instance, would faithfully arrive at dawn each day, her purpose twofold: to replenish her earthen jug with the pristine waters and to confide her daily anxieties and burdens to the resident naiad, the spirit believed to inhabit the spring. Similarly, a diligent shepherd would conclude his day by pausing at the spring each dusk, offering tidings from the verdant mountainsides and attentively seeking counsel regarding the welfare of his flock. Concurrently, a collective of young mothers convened weekly, not merely to ritualistically cleanse their infants in the blessed liquid, but also to collectively navigate the intricate labyrinth of raising offspring, sharing both the joys and the daunting challenges inherent in their roles. These spontaneously formed gatherings organically fostered their distinct customs and interpretations of the sacred. Through generations of observation and shared experience, they discerned the precise junctures of the day when the spring was most inclined to impart its wisdom, which types of offerings were most propitious, and which specific inquiries were most likely to elicit unambiguous responses. This invaluable body of localized knowledge was meticulously transmitted across successive generations, culminating in a rich tapestry of oral traditions that enveloped each revered location. The capricious rhythm of the seasons exerted a profound influence on the disposition and perceived personality of the springs, mirroring their pervasive impact on every facet of the natural world. A spring whose waters effervesced with a joyous ebullience during the languid days of summer might transform into a reflective and deliberately paced entity as winter's chill descended. Furthermore, Certain springs were reputed to possess heightened prophetic abilities during specific lunar phases or on particular dates within the religious calendar, their voices amplified by celestial and temporal alignments. During periods of profound societal upheaval, be it the ravages of warfare, the scourge of widespread pestilence, or the destructive force of natural cataclysms, these sacred springs transcended their individual roles to become crucial epicenters for communal supplication and deliberation. During such dire times, the populace would congregate in numbers far exceeding their usual attendance, their quest extending beyond mere personal guidance to encompass a collective yearning for sagacity on how to navigate and ultimately endure these formidable epochs. The ethereal pronouncements emanating from the springs frequently underscored the virtues of fortitude, resilience, and the indispensable necessity of preserving human bonds and solidarity, even when the fabric of the world appeared to unravel into disarray. Beyond their capacity for immediate guidance, the springs also functioned as informal repositories of community lore and historical remembrance. The naiads, believed to reside within their depths, were thought to possess an encyclopedic memory of every occurrence near their waters, every whispered conversation, every fervent prayer, every pivotal incident that had transpired. Therefore, consulting a spring was not solely about acquiring novel insights. It was an act of accessing the cumulative wisdom bequeathed by all those who had sought solace and assistance there in epochs past. Certain springs, through repeated association, cultivated reputations for facilitating highly specialized forms of communication. For instance, the spring situated in proximity to a renowned pottery workshop was whispered to offer subtle counsel concerning sophisticated artistic methodologies. Similarly, the spring nestled beside a flourishing vineyard provided sagacious advice on the nuanced art of viticulture and wine production. The spring, positioned at a pivotal crossroads, where three significant trade routes converged, became celebrated for its profound understanding of distant lands and the intricate customs of foreign peoples. As the inexorable march of centuries progressed, and Greece successively fell under the dominion of Roman rule and subsequently embraced Christian tenets, many of these ancient sacred springs steadfastly retained their profound significance, even as their underlying interpretations underwent a metamorphosis. Christian hermits, recognizing the inherent sanctity of these locations, often erected modest chapels beside them, intuiting that these places had perpetually served as permeable membranes between distinct realms, irrespective of the specific nomenclature attributed to the divine presences dwelling within. Even in the contemporary era, for those who possess the discerning eye and knowledge of their whereabouts, a number of these venerable springs continue their perpetual flow, still frequented by individuals seeking clarity of thought and inner tranquility. While the specific rituals observed may have evolved and the names invoked for the divine might have transitioned, the fundamental human impulse to sit beside the soothing cadence of flowing water and attentively listen for profound wisdom endures undiminished across the vast expanse of time. As one settles beside this particular spring, nestled within the embrace of the olive grove, allowing its gentle murmuring voice to intertwine with the subtle sigh of the wind rustling through ancient leaves, one might discover a newfound lucidity in their own thoughts, an enhanced ease in discerning the whispers of their own inner voice. The water, with its perpetual and patient dialogue with the earth and the heavens, persistently transmits messages between worlds, just as it has unfailingly done throughout eternity. in the deepening twilight, as the inaugural stars begin their shimmering appearance, reflected in the tranquil pools interspersed among the springs. One might ponder what profound questions they would entrust to these ancient, attentive waters. There is a delicate blossom, perhaps familiar from early spring gardens, characterized by its pristine white petals gracefully curving around a luminous golden core, swaying with a gentle acquiescence to the zephyr's touch. The ancient Hellenes bestowed upon this flower the appellation Narcissus, believing it to enshrine the poignant memory of a youthful man who dedicated his days to an activity we might now perceive as utterly commonplace: perambulation. One can readily conjure his image traversing the rolling hillsides beyond an ancient Greek polis, perhaps in the vicinity of Thespiae within Boeotia, where the nascent morning mist tenderly caresses the olive groves and the meandering pathways lazily snake between venerable low-slung stone walls. His given name was Narcissus, and with each new dawn, he would rouse himself before the sun's ascent, don his unadorned sandals, and embark upon his customary circuits through the bucolic countryside. So, the act of walking itself was by no means an anomaly. It was a common practice for young Greek men to spend their mornings in this manner, navigating the landscape at a measured cadence that afforded them the opportunity to observe the minutiae of their surroundings. The precise manner in which the morning shadows stretched across the terraced hills, the subtle shifts in illumination as sunlight permeated various types of foliage, and the distinct vocalizations emitted by birds when they presumed no human ears were privy to their avian discourse. What distinguished Narcissus, however, was the palpable reaction elicited from those who chanced to encounter him. As one hypothetically accompanies him on one of these perambulations, it becomes evident that other individuals, young women carrying amphorae brimming with water, shepherds guiding their woolly charges, elderly men seated tranquilly in their doorways, all invariably pause in their activities as he passes. This cessation of motion is not provoked by any dramatic or ostentatious display on his part, but rather by something far more subtle and profoundly enigmatic. It might reside in the particular way his hair catches the ambient light, or perhaps in the seemingly effortless and inherently graceful quality of his movements. The Hellenes possessed a specific lexicon for this intrinsic attribute. They termed it beauty, yet their understanding of this concept diverged significantly from contemporary interpretations. For them, beauty was an inherent quality that compelled one to momentarily halt and contemplate more profound existential inquiries. Questions concerning inherent harmony, the inexplicable reasons why certain elements within the cosmos appeared to coalesce with perfect synchronicity, while others conveyed an impression of awkwardness or artificiality. One particular morning, as Narcissus ambled along a path that closely paralleled a diminutive stream, a young woman named Echo in the given text, spied him from a considerable distance. She had been diligently gathering herbs in the refreshing coolness of the early hours, meticulously filling her wicker basket with the wild mint and oregano that flourished along the water's edge. The most logical and sensible course of action would have been to proffer a cordial salutation, perhaps to inquire about the path ahead, or to offer a comment on the agreeable meteorological conditions. Yet, Echo found herself inexplicably hesitating. There was an ineffable quality about the manner in which Narcissus moved through the landscape that instilled in her an overwhelming desire to simply observe and listen, much in the same way one might discreetly pause to watch a deer that remains blissfully unaware of human presence. She maintained a respectful distance, following him not with an intent to intrude, but rather out of a burgeoning curiosity regarding the destination of an individual who appeared so utterly engrossed in the very act of walking itself. This pattern of detached observation gradually solidified into a routine. Day after day, Echo discovered herself irresistibly drawn to surreptitiously observe Narcissus from a cautious remove. She began to discern specific traits. His consistent preference for pathways that led near sources of water, his occasional pauses to gaze upon his own likeness reflected in the streams or pools, not out of any perceived vanity, but with the identical gentle attentiveness he bestowed upon every other element of his natural surroundings. The act of gazing at his own reflection might strike an observer as marginally peculiar, yet not dramatically so. After all, in an epoch preceding the widespread availability of polished mirrors, clear water constituted one of the scant few mediums through which one could obtain an unblemished view of oneself. Moreover, there exists an inherently human inclination towards curiosity regarding one's own physical presentation, particularly when others react to it in ways that defy immediate comprehension. One can readily envision Narcissus kneeling by the stream's edge, his gaze fixed upon the countenance reflected therein, perhaps pondering the very same questions that any introspective individual might entertain. Do I bear a resemblance to my father? What do others perceive when their eyes alight upon me? Why do conversations sometimes abruptly cease upon my entrance into a room? The duration of these pauses by the water incrementally lengthened with each passing day. What initially commenced as a fleeting glance progressively evolved into several minutes of profound, quiet contemplation. Narcissus began to carry small portions of bread or fruit with him, partaking of his humble morning repast while seated beside placid pools or streams, always selecting locations where the water's surface was sufficiently still to afford an unblemished reflection. There was an undeniable serenity inherent in these morning repasts by the water's edge. The ambient light was soft and diffused. The air remained refreshingly cool, and the entire world exuded an unhurried tranquility. One can readily visualize the gentle symphony of sounds, the subtle murmur of water flowing over smooth stones, the delicate rustling of leaves stirred by a faint zephyr, and the distant muted calls of farmers making their way to their fields. However, a subtle yet significant transformation gradually began to unfold within these tranquil moments. The cursory glances at his reflection became progressively protracted and intensely focused. Narcissus commenced a nascent interaction with the aqueous image, tilting his head to observe the corresponding movement of the reflection, extending a hand to lightly touch the surface, and observing with fascination how the image momentarily dissolved and then seamlessly reformed. It is not arduous to comprehend the psychological progression that might lead to this phenomenon. When one dedicates an ample amount of time to gazing at one's reflection in still water, particularly under the soft, ethereal light of early morning, the image can begin to appear startlingly animated and responsive. A slight movement of the head elicits an immediate mirroring motion. A smile is instantaneously reciprocated. An outstretched hand is met with an identical gesture. Days elapsed, and Narcissus found himself spending an increasing proportion of his time by the water's edge. His daily walks grew progressively shorter, invariably culminating at the same pellucid pool where his reflection manifested with the greatest vividness and lifelike quality. He began to bring more provisions, then lingered through the entire morning, and subsequently into the afternoon. From her concealed vantage point amidst the trees, Echo observed this gradual, disquieting metamorphosis with burgeoning apprehension. She watched as Narcissus began to engage in discourse with his own reflection, conducting conversations that largely comprised extended silences, punctuated by gentle, almost tender utterances. She witnessed him meticulously arrange blossoms along the pool's perimeter, as if preparing offerings for an unseen entity residing within the aqueous depths. The daily existence of Narcissus increasingly revolved around these captivating encounters with his own reflection. Each morning, instead of embarking upon his customary lengthy excursions, he would proceed directly to the tranquil pool. He would often bring his morning meal, yet frequently neglected to consume it. Utterly captivated by the mesmerizing spectacle and the silent dialogue he maintained with the aquatic image, one could readily comprehend how an individual, particularly one who habitually spent their days in solitary contemplation and observation, might gradually lose their grasp on the delicate demarcation separating the reflected illusion from tangible reality. The watery image, responding with such immediate precision to every subtle gesture, appearing so profoundly present and attentive, began to foster the profound sensation of genuine companionship. Echo, observing this unfolding tragedy, bore a sorrow akin to one who possesses an understanding of something ineffable, a predicament beyond easy articulation or remedy. She witnessed Narcissus's physical form growing perceptibly gaunter, his days entirely consumed by his vigil at the pool's edge, where he would earnestly confide to the water profound thoughts and intimate sentiments he had never before divulged to another living soul. His ultimate demise, when it arrived, was characterized by a slow, quiet diminishment rather than any dramatic flourish. One particular morning, Echo reached her accustomed vantage point only to discover that Narcissus had remained motionless beside the pool since the previous day. He lay prone by the water, his gaze still fixed upon his reflection, yet his breathing had become shallow and his movements sluggish. By the arrival of evening, he had achieved a stillness as profound and unmoving as the very water he adored. And in the precise location where he had spent countless mornings, Echo discerned a novel sight. A diminutive white blossom, its center radiating a golden hue, emerging directly at the pool's periphery, where the earth retained its moisture without becoming waterlogged. The ancient Greeks held a profound conviction that some narratives do not so much conclude as they undergo a metamorphosis into something distinct, yet intrinsically related. The exquisite flower that materialized there bloomed faithfully each spring, perpetually situated near a body of water, and consistently inclining itself subtly towards its own mirrored image. They bestowed upon it the appellation Narcissus, and carefully cultivated it within their gardens as a potent memento of inquiries that defy simplistic resolutions. What does it truly signify to comprehend oneself? How does one effectively harmonize self-awareness with a conscious recognition of others? And why do some of life's most pivotal lessons emerge from the quiet, routine decisions individuals make when they perceive themselves to be unwatched? Shifting our focus to the act of observation from a distance, let us metaphorically settle ourselves upon the ancient stone benches of a venerable Greek theater and contemplate the remarkable acoustic properties of the human voice as it traverses these gracefully curved amphitheaters, reverberating off polished marble surfaces and returning to us in a transformed, yet unmistakably recognizable form. One might imagine oneself seated within the theater of Dionysus in Athens on a balmy afternoon in late spring, perhaps around 450 BCE. The sun would be sufficiently elevated to cast sharply defined shadows from the tiered stone seating, and a fragrant aroma would waft from the wild herbs, thyme and rosemary, thriving in the crevices between the marble blocks, their essences released as the day's warmth intensified. The majestic theater now stands vacant between performances, offering a unique opportunity to perceive how one's voice behaves within this monumental space. Utter any phrase, any sound, and attend to the journey of that sound as it descends towards the circular orchestra, strikes the stone backdrop, and then returns to you a brief moment later, marginally softer perhaps, but unequivocally discernible. This captivating acoustic phenomenon profoundly intrigued the Greeks, and they meticulously integrated it into their philosophical understanding of how narratives function, the intricate workings of memory, and the compelling reason why certain voices appear to persist in specific locales long after the original speaker has fallen silent. They personified this returning vocal essence as echo, conceiving her as an entity who had once possessed the unconstrained ability to speak freely, but whose destiny was now confined to merely reiterating the utterances of others. The genesis of Echo's own narrative does not unfold within the confines of a theater, but rather amidst the verdant hills and dense forests, where auditory phenomena manifest in even more enigmatic ways. Should one ever have raised their voice in a sprawling mountain valley, or projected it across the placid surface of a lake, they would be familiar with the peculiar sensation of their voice returning from multiple directions, occasionally overlapping itself, thereby fabricating fleeting instances where one appears to be engaged in a reciprocal exchange with the very landscape. Echo, in her original form, was a mountain nymph, one of those ethereal mythological beings whom the Greeks envisioned inhabiting untamed wildernesses, entrusted with the guardianship of nature's subtle enigmas. The perennial flow of certain springs, the symmetrical growth of particular tree groves, the mysterious way the wind sometimes conveyed sounds from surprisingly remote distances. However, Echo possessed a singular aptitude that distinguished her from her fellow nymphs. She was exceptionally gifted in the art of conversation, not merely in the act of speaking, but in orchestrating the kind of enthralling, delightful discourse that causes time to dissolve unnoticed. She possessed the remarkable ability to spin tales that organically developed upon one another, intricately weaving in fresh details and astute observations that rendered even familiar narratives vibrant and utterly unforeseen. This extraordinary talent for engaging conversation captured the notice of Hera, the formidable consort of Zeus, though not in a manner that brought pleasure to the goddess. It was well known that Zeus habitually absented himself from Mount Olympus for clandestine escapades. And whenever Hera embarked upon a search for him, she frequently encountered Echo, poised to deliver elaborate, endlessly entertaining anecdotes about myriad subjects, all meticulously designed to skirt any mention of Zeus's actual whereabouts. Envision these intricate verbal exchanges: Hera's arrival at a secluded mountain grove, her intent search for someone plainly evident, and Echo's graceful emergence from among the trees with a cheerful salutation, immediately launching into captivating observations concerning the local fauna or meticulously detailed accounts of shifting meteorological patterns, or even profound philosophical inquiries regarding the essence of temporality and recollection. These dialogues were, without question, genuinely captivating. Echo possessed an innate knack for unearthing intriguing perspectives on mundane topics, yet their ultimate effect was to strategically impede Hera's investigations just long enough for Zeus to conclude whatever clandestine venture had drawn him to the mortal realm, and to return to Olympus via an alternative route. After this recurring pattern had manifested several times, Hera ultimately comprehended the deception. Rather than simply inflicting upon Echo a dramatic and severe retribution, the sagacious goddess elected a consequence that precisely mirrored the transgression. Since Echo had artfully employed her gift for conversation to obstruct authentic communication, she would be stripped entirely of the capacity to initiate speech. From that fateful day forward, Echo could only reiterate the utterances of others, and specifically, only the concluding few words of what they had spoken. Her voice retained its exquisite clarity and beauty, yet she was irrevocably deprived of the power to commence dialogues, to narrate stories, or to articulate her own intrinsic thoughts directly. This profound metamorphosis fundamentally altered Echo's engagement with the world. Instead of occupying the central position at social gatherings, effortlessly drawing individuals into animated discourse, she transformed into an entity who listened with meticulous attention, discerning profound meaning within the fragmented vestiges of speech that echoed back to her. When the esteemed Greek poets and playwrights recounted this myth, they were simultaneously delving into a fundamental truth about the functional dynamics of language within theatrical performance. In their grand theaters, actors donned masks meticulously crafted to amplify their voices, and the architectural design itself was engineered to project speech with crystalline clarity to the most distant seats. However, the sound also inevitably reverberated and returned, thereby generating intricate layers of meaning. A tragedian delivering a poignant soliloquy on themes of profound loss might perceive his own words resonating back from the ancient stone seating, and both he and the attending audience would interpret that acoustic return as a form of profound commentary, the very edifice of the theater appearing to respond to and reflect upon the deep emotions being expressed. The perceptive poets grasped that an echo is never an exact replication. When sound rebounds towards the listener, it is invariably modified by its journey. It becomes softer, experiences a slight delay, and is occasionally fragmented. These subtle alterations possess the capacity to imbue familiar words with a renewed quality, or to unveil additional strata of meaning that were not immediately apparent when the words were initially uttered. Within the rich tapestry of Greek poetry, Echo thus evolved into a symbolic figure representing this transformative power inherent in repetition. When the celebrated poet Sappho composed verses on the subject of love, she sometimes employed echo as an evocative metaphor for the way emotions reverberate through the corridors of memory. How a beloved's words unexpectedly return to one's consciousness at unforeseen moments, altered by the passage of time and the intensity of emotion, yet still unmistakably recognizable. The pastoral poets, whose works focused on the lives of shepherds and the rustic charm of rural existence, frequently incorporated Echo as a character who engaged with solitary herdsmen in secluded mountain valleys. In these lyrical compositions, the dialogue between a shepherd and Echo became a profound vehicle for exploring themes of solitude and companionship. How conversing with oneself or with the natural landscape can, at times, furnish a unique species of solace and clarity that direct conversation with other human beings often fails to provide. One can readily envision these poetic shepherds dedicating long, isolated days to their flocks, voicing questions or observations into the vast expanse, and then intently listening to the quality of their words as they returned. The query, "Is anyone there?" would condense into the haunting "anyone there?" The statement, "I think it might rain," would simplify to "might rain." The introspective, "I wonder if she remembers me," would become the poignant "remembers me." The echo frequently appeared to distill the most crucial essence of what had been spoken, stripping away hesitations and qualifications to unveil the core concern or fervent hope. In this manner, an interaction with echo evolved into a gentle process of self-discovery, a means of apprehending one's own internal thoughts with enhanced lucidity. Greek theater directors possessed a sophisticated understanding of this psychological dimension of echo and skillfully integrated it into their stagecraft. Crucial speeches were occasionally delivered from specific positions on stage where the natural acoustics would generate the most pronounced echo effect, ensuring that pivotal words would literally return, thereby underscoring the central themes. For instance, when Sophocles aimed to accentuate a character's profound isolation, he might strategically position the actor such that their words would resonate with striking prominence, creating the powerful impression that they were truly alone, save for the intimate conversation with their own reflected voice. Similarly, when Euripides sought to convey that a character was tormented by past decisions, he could artfully employ echo to make certain words return with an insistent, haunting quality. However, echo within the rich tapestry of Greek poetic tradition was not exclusively depicted as a figure of despondency or isolation. In the realm of comedic plays, her interactions often assumed a mischievous and ingenious character. A performer, for instance, might meticulously craft their dialogue, manipulating their utterances so that echo's inherent reiteration would ingeniously generate wordplay or dual interpretations, thereby transmuting a perceived constraint into an expression of sharp intellect. The lyric poets, for their part, discovered in echo a profound metaphor for the very essence of poetic creation and reception, illustrating how the most compelling verses reverberate with fresh interpretations for successive audiences, and how familiar lexicon can astonish us when reconfigured into novel structures or articulated within varied situational frameworks. As one settles into the hushed quietude of a deserted amphitheater, listening intently to the reverberation of their own voice rebounding from the venerable masonry, a contemplation might arise regarding the nature of experiencing the world, primarily through such echoed discourse. What profound insights might one glean about the very fabric of language if communication were solely achievable via iterative utterance and reciprocal acknowledgement? Perhaps an individual would cultivate a more acutely discerning ear for the precise vocabulary others employ, becoming increasingly cognizant of the cadence and melodic qualities inherent in everyday discourse. It is conceivable that a profounder reverence for quiescence would develop, for those interstitial spaces between words where interpretations can transmute and proliferate with evocative subtlety. The Hellenic populace held the conviction that echo continued to reside in locales where utterances reverberated and rebounded within theatrical venues and amidst mountain valleys, across expansive lakes and in the depths of primeval forests. They regarded her not as a pathos-laden character, but rather as an entity who had mastered an alternative mode of engagement in the perpetual dialogue linking humanity with its surrounding environment. And perhaps it is this enduring perspective that explains why Hellenic verse continues to resonate within our own writing and thinking. It illuminates why these venerable locutions persist in their recurrence across centuries, transformed by their extended temporal transit, yet still discernible, consistently imparting novel interpretations each time we lend them sufficiently careful, auditory attention. Envision yourself upon an unpaved track that meanders between expanses of olive orchards situated somewhere within the region of Attica, perhaps an hour's leisurely stroll from the bustling heart of Athens. It is the nascent hours of morning, and the haze is subtly dissipating from the depressions. The olive trees stand as ancient sentinels, their boles gnarled and etched by eons of elemental exposure, their argent-hued foliage glistening in the gentle caress of the breeze. Transitioning from the reverberating pronouncements heard within theatrical venues, let us deliberately walk into the Hellenic pastoral expanse and ponder why the inhabitants of that epical past, millennia removed, maintained the conviction that the terrestrial expanse itself possessed an inherent communicative faculty, and more importantly, that its voice merited diligent auditory attention. As one proceeds along the path, an observation surfaces. The topography appears to possess an intrinsic cadence of its own. The arboricultural distribution, for instance, conforms organically to the inherent topographical undulations of the hillside. The dry stone delimitations partitioning distinct orchards are constructed from lithic materials unequivocally sourced from the local substratum. Even the foot-worn track beneath one's soles arcs gracefully to trace the most amenable passage through the terrain, polished smooth by successive epochs of human transit, by generations who comprehended the imperative of collaborating with the land, rather than opposing its inherent characteristics. They discerned, for example, that specific locales appeared to consistently engender distinct cognitive states or emotional dispositions. A copse of venerable oaks could reliably induce in visitors a state of profound introspection and gravity, whereas a verdant expanse adjacent to a natural fount might dependably elevate one's morale and instill a greater sense of hopefulness concerning any challenges confronting them. To the Greeks who traversed these identical pathways, this observed concordance between anthropocentric endeavors and inherent ecological rhythms suggested something profoundly significant. The landscape functioned as an engaged collaborator in the life that transpired within its confines, transcending mere scenic context or exploitable commodity. These observations, the Greeks believed, did not constitute arbitrary happenstance, but rather served as testament to the notion that disparate locales possessed unique temperaments, employing varied modalities of conveying information to the humans who spent time there. A sloping terrain adorned with indigenous botanicals, for instance, could articulate through its emitted fragrance when solar radiation imbued the flora with thermal energy, transmitting vital intelligence concerning meteorological conditions, seasonal progression, and edaphic vitality. The Greeks cultivated intricate customs centered on deciphering these geocentric transmissions. Prior to making consequential choices regarding where to plant crops, where to excavate wells, or where to establish habitations, they would dedicate time to potential locations, attending assiduously to nuanced indicators and recurring configurations. To Hellenic farmers and shepherds, These botanical assemblages resembled interactive dialogues, with every distinct species reciprocally engaging with the provisions of its counterparts. The rosemary, for instance, contributed to safeguarding adjacent flora from specific entomological threats, while the fennel's extensive root system drew subterranean moisture nearer to the epidermal layer where smaller plants could reach it. The natural environment was, in essence, imparting profound instruction on synergistic collaboration and reciprocal sustenance. If one possessed the acumen to perceive and decipher the visual phenomena, one could experience something akin to this oneself. As one continues walking, notice how the aroma emanating from the olive foliage transmutes as the nascent daylight intensifies. Observe with discernment the manner in which specific botanical assortments naturally coexist. Indigenous rosemary thriving in proximity to the dry stone boundaries, fennel flourishing in humid depressions where precipitation accumulates post-rainfall, and minute orchids burgeoning beneath the umbrage of more substantial arboreal specimens. They meticulously monitored the hydrological dynamics, traversing and permeating the terrain during different seasons. They vigilantly noted which zones drew avian fauna and advantageous entomological species, and which appeared to dissuade detrimental organisms. They perceived how the luminous characteristics evolved across the diurnal cycle in disparate spots, and how the aerodynamic currents transmuted in accordance with topographical variations. This meticulous scrutiny cultivated within them the conviction that the terrestrial expanse was dynamically transmitting intelligence that could inform anthropocentric choices. An inclined ground, retaining its verdancy deeper into the arid period, was, in their understanding, conveying insights regarding subterranean hydrological reserves, a locale where indigenous therapeutic flora thrived exceptionally, was intimating its suitability as a site for restorative practices. Greek mythology subsequently codified these perceptions into narrative constructs concerning nymphal entities and elemental intelligences dwelling in designated locales, capable of interacting with individuals who demonstrated due deference. Yet, these narratives transcended mere imaginative narratives. They represented refined methodologies for embedding empirical wisdom about how to coexist enduringly within specific ecological frameworks. When an individual approached the sacred arboreal sanctuary in pursuit of counsel regarding the optimal period for agricultural sowing or reaping, the clerical figures could proffer recommendations predicated upon nuanced shifts in arboreal comportment. The chronology of foliar unfurling, the configurations of massed genesis, and the manner in which the boughs swayed under varied atmospheric currents, indicative of broader meteorological trends. The sylvan sanctuaries dedicated to the Olympian deity Zeus, for example, were customarily situated in regions where the arboreal specimens attained exceptional stature and longevity, frequently proximate to dependable hydrological origins. The sacerdotal interpreters of the communications emanating from these sylvan enclaves were usually individuals who had devoted extensive periods to discerning the arboreal reactions to climatic fluctuations, cyclical metamorphoses, and other ecological determinants. Similarly, the hallowed founts where people came to hear oracular pronouncements were selected for sites where the aquatic efflux, limpidity, thermal state, or mineral composition exhibited variations demonstrably aligned with meteorological conditions, cyclical progressions, or other inherent environmental occurrences. The sacerdotal women tasked with elucidating these messages were adept perceptualists, possessing a profound comprehension of environmental indices. The Greeks firmly believed that this kind of prolonged, assiduous scrutiny could yield profound revelations that were inaccessible via alternative pedagogical modalities. The unwavering cadence of ecological phenomena, the incremental transformations in luminosity and umbrage, the nuanced alterations in atmospheric current vectors, and the manner in which flora and fauna reacted to these metamorphoses could, collectively, function as a contemplative practice that elucidated cognitive processes and facilitated the reconciliation of intrinsic dichotomies. However, the Hellenic conviction in communicative topographies extended beyond mere utilitarian functions. They also believed that the terrestrial realm was capable of conveying more esoteric forms of sagacity, imparting revelations pertaining to eudaimonic existence, strategies for mediating discord, and means of comprehending one's position within the overarching tapestry of being. Imagine devoting a full diurnal segment to quiescent contemplation in a singular location, perhaps an elevated expanse affording a panoramic vista of a depression, simply perceiving the metamorphoses of the tableau as luminosity transitions and the temporal cycle advances. One might discern how the umbrageous patterns delineate diverse facets of the topography at different junctures. The chromatic spectrum of the environment transmutes with the sun's celestial traverse. This philosophical framework fostered a lifestyle characterized by acute sensitivity to ecological nuances. People acquired the faculty of discerning meteorological shifts indicated by avian or entomological comportment. They cultivated an acute awareness of how their corporeal and affective states were influenced by barometric conditions, atmospheric moisture, and seasonal luminous variations. They recounted narratives of individuals who attained significant revelations during protracted sojourns in unadulterated environments, not by means of spectacular preternatural occurrences, but through the incremental comprehension derived from harmonizing their personal tempo with the deliberate, consistent pulsations of the terrestrial realm. An individual grappling with a challenging predicament might dedicate multiple days to perambulating an identical trajectory across a specific topography, attending to the transmutation of their cognitive and emotional states in correlation with varied locales and diurnal periods. The counsel gleaned emerged via this methodology of scrutiny and introspection, but they perceived it as a direct transmission from the terrestrial environment itself. The very environment around us communicates, offering a continuous stream of information and sensory input. As twilight descends and one retraces their steps along the winding path through the olive grove, an individual might perceive elements previously overlooked during the morning stroll. The interplay of light filtering through the verdant foliage crafts entirely new patterns, casting intricate shadows upon the ground. The cool evening breeze carries a different symphony of aromas, perhaps the subtle fragrance of night-blooming jasmine or damp earth. The melodies of birdsong have undergone a distinct transformation, evolving into the subdued chirps and calls characteristic of creatures preparing for the nocturnal hours, a stark contrast to the lively morning chorus. Ancient Greek architectural principles and urban planning profoundly embodied this profound comprehension of the landscape's communicative power. Structures were meticulously oriented to harness the most advantageous prevailing winds and to optimize natural light, ensuring both comfort and aesthetic appeal. Public gathering places, such as agoras and amphitheaters, were strategically positioned in locales where the inherent acoustics and sweeping visual panoramas naturally amplified and enriched the various activities and civic discourses that transpired within their confines. Gardens, far from being mere utilitarian plots, were meticulously conceived as sanctuaries where individuals could sustain and deepen their ongoing dialogues with the natural cosmos. The thoughtful arrangement of diverse plant species, the deliberate meandering of pathways, and the strategic placement of tranquil water features were all orchestrated to foster opportunities for the kind of serene contemplation and meticulous observation that the Hellenes firmly believed were the conduits to profound wisdom and enlightened insight. The Greeks would have interpreted these subtle shifts in the environment, the changing light, the evolving scents, the altered bird calls, not merely as pleasant deviations, but as the landscape actively continuing its ceaseless discourse with any individual prepared to lend a patient ear and engage in careful, discerning scrutiny. And perhaps within this ancient practice, treating our surroundings not merely as a picturesque backdrop to our human endeavors, but as a sentient, thoughtful conversationalist, lies a valuable lesson for contemporary life. What novel insights might we glean? What profound truths might we uncover if we were to approach our own daily perambulations and immersive outdoor experiences as precious opportunities to genuinely listen? What might the landscape be endeavoring to convey about the intricate rhythms of the changing seasons, the delicate vitality of the local ecosystem, or even the more profound underlying patterns that intricately weave together all forms of existence? Hera, the venerable queen of the gods, dedicated countless days to observing the mortal realm below with an unparalleled patience and meticulous attention, an attribute born of her boundless temporal existence and a profound, insatiable curiosity to truly comprehend the intricate workings of the universe. Her divine identity transcended her role as merely Zeus's consort. She was a formidable deity in her own right, revered for her steadfast guardianship of families and her unwavering commitment to upholding the sacred tenets of social order and marital fidelity. As our reflections turn to the interplay between landscapes and the myriad voices that inhabit them, let us revisit that pivotal juncture when Echo's extraordinary conversational prowess captured the discerning attention of the divine powers. Let us then meticulously consider the profound revelations embedded within her narrative concerning the intricate and often fraught relationships that exist between communication, the elusive nature of truth, and the enduring virtue of loyalty. One stands, in imagination, upon a resplendent marble terrace adorning the majestic heights of Mount Olympus, gazing down upon the sprawling tapestry of the mortal world, which lies unfurled below like an exquisitely detailed cartographic representation. From this Olympian vantage point, one can discern grand, overarching patterns that remain entirely imperceptible from the earthly ground level. Mighty rivers, like silver veins, interconnect distant and disparate regions. Imposing mountain ranges rise as natural, formidable boundaries, shaping civilizations and cultures. Human settlements, with their bustling activities, invariably cluster around vital resources such as life-giving springs and the rich, fertile valleys that promise sustenance. Zeus, the king of the gods, meanwhile, harbored a distinctly different rapport with the mortal plane, a realm that Hera meticulously observed with steady, discerning detachment. Zeus, in stark contrast, preferred a more direct, intensely personal form of involvement. He would frequently undergo astonishing metamorphoses, assuming a myriad of guises, be it the powerful form of a bull, the graceful elegance of a swan, or a dazzling shower of golden light, and thus venture forth to engage directly with mortals, exhibiting a particular predilection for mortal women, often with amorous intentions. From her elevated and omniscient perspective, Hera possessed the unique capacity to discern recurring patterns of behavior that the very individuals involved might not even recognize within themselves. She keenly observed the ebb and flow of human relationships, noting when marriages flourished in harmonious accord and when they faltered under the weight of conflict and discord. She carefully monitored how communities navigated their internal disputes and how they collectively celebrated their triumphs. Her discerning gaze paid particular heed to matters of unwavering loyalty and profound trust, perhaps due to the perpetual and arduous challenges that continually assailed her own divine marriage on precisely these fronts. These frequent and often clandestine expeditions undertaken by Zeus invariably fomented an ongoing, palpable tension within the divine couple's relationship. Zeus, in his self-justification, perceived them as natural, unbridled expressions of his boundless curiosity and inherent vitality. Hera, conversely, interpreted them as egregious betrayals of their sacred matrimonial vows and as potentially disruptive forces to the very social order and stability that she tirelessly strived to uphold and maintain. Their disagreement transcended mere personal grievance. It embodied a profound philosophical schism, a fundamental divergence in their understanding of the inherent responsibilities that inevitably accompany immense power and exalted position. Echo, a nymph of the woodlands, tragically found herself ensnared amidst the tumultuous currents of this divine marital dynamic. Initially, it is highly probable that she remained blissfully unaware of the profounder implications of her seemingly innocuous actions. She dwelled within the untamed sylvan precincts, where Zeus frequently chose to conduct his surreptitious adventures, and she possessed an innately sociable disposition, coupled with a fiercely protective instinct towards the community of nymphs and mortals who shared these verdant spaces. One can readily envision these fateful encounters. Hera, arriving in a secluded forest grove, her demeanor radiating the focused intensity of a relentless tracker pursuing a scent, and Echo, emerging gracefully from among the ancient trees, offering a warm, effusive greeting, immediately captivated by whatever Hera might wish to discuss. "Are you in search of someone, noble goddess? How utterly fascinating. You know, I was just contemplating the intricacies of how we locate individuals and whether our attraction to certain places stems from the anticipation of who might be found there, or if our true allure lies within the intrinsic charm of the places themselves." Whenever Hera would materialize in these secluded locales, her intent clearly focused on locating Zeus. Echo's initial instinctive impulse was likely one of simple, unadulterated hospitality. Here stood a visitor who appeared visibly distressed or genuinely concerned, and Echo, with her unparalleled conversational acumen, possessed the perfect skill set to offer both a diverting distraction and genuine comfort. It was entirely natural for her to engage Hera in the kind of captivating, meandering discourse that might alleviate her apparent disquiet and foster a more relaxed, agreeable disposition. However, from Hera's increasingly suspicious vantage point, these ostensibly delightful conversations began to exhibit a disconcerting, recurring pattern. Invariably, every time she endeavored to trace Zeus's movements, she would inevitably encounter Echo. And without fail, Every conversation with Echo would fortuitously extend for precisely long enough for any fresh trails to grow cold, and for her diligent searches to ultimately prove futile. Regardless of whether Echo was consciously and deliberately shielding Zeus, or simply acting upon her ingrained sociable nature, the ultimate effect remained identical: a consistent and frustrating interference with Hera's determined efforts to hold her elusive husband accountable for his transgressions. The specific punishment that Hera ultimately meted out to Echo was a profound reflection of her keen understanding of the precise nature of the problem that Echo inadvertently represented. The core issue was not that Echo harbored malicious intent or was inherently deceptive. Indeed, it is highly probable that she was entirely sincere and genuinely well-meaning in her effusive conversational offerings. The fundamental problem lay in the fact that her extraordinary gift for engaging discourse was being employed, whether by design or by sheer happenstance, to actively impede authentic and transparent communication. Echo's distinctive conversational style was likely genuinely captivating and profoundly engaging, characterized by unexpected intellectual connections and insightful, thoughtful observations that rendered even the most familiar topics seem fresh, novel, and eminently worthy of renewed exploration. It was the kind of immersive conversation that effortlessly causes one to lose all track of time, precisely because one is so thoroughly engrossed in the shared intellectual process of collaboratively exploring and developing ideas. Thus, Hera's meticulously crafted curse was precisely calibrated to address this specific transgression. Echo would indeed retain her famously beautiful voice and her innate, fervent desire to communicate, but she would be irrevocably stripped of to initiate any conversation or to articulate original thoughts. Her existence would be forever confined to responding solely to what others uttered, and even then, only by echoing the final few words of their statements, a haunting linguistic shadow. This poignant curse illuminates a profound aspect of Hera's understanding of divine justice. Rather than merely silencing Echo completely or inflicting a punishment entirely unrelated to her actions, Hera deliberately chose a consequence that maintained an undeniable, direct connection between the transgression and its penalty. Echo had inadvertently utilized conversation to obscure or deflect from the truth, and consequently, she would be deprived of the capacity to lead or direct conversations. Yet she would retain the residual ability to reflect and respond to them in a fragmented manner. This severe punishment transformed Echo from an individual who possessed the power to control and steer the direction of conversations into one who became entirely dependent on others for both the content and the overall trajectory of communication. Furthermore, it meant that her responses would frequently appear cryptic, incomplete, or even nonsensical, given her inability to articulate anything beyond mere fragments of what had been spoken to her. From Hera's austere perspective, this likely seemed like a just and equitable resolution, one that effectively addressed the specific problem while still permitting Echo to continue her existence within her natural environment. Echo could still interact with the world around her, but she could no longer wield those interactions to interfere with other people's earnest attempts to comprehend what was genuinely transpiring. However, the punishment also starkly revealed the inherent complexity of rendering judgment in situations where individuals possess mixed motives or where seemingly good intentions inadvertently lead to profoundly problematic outcomes. Echo might have genuinely harbored affection and concern for both Hera and Zeus, desiring to prevent conflicts between them by offering diverting distractions and comfort to Hera, while simultaneously affording Zeus the precious time he needed to avoid uncomfortable confrontations. From Echo's compassionate perspective, her conversational interventions might have appeared as acts of peacemaking, a genuine attempt to assist everyone involved in circumventing painful scenes and in preserving a semblance of harmony. She might not have fully contemplated the profound truth that often, avoiding difficult and necessary conversations can, paradoxically, exacerbate underlying problems rather than ameliorate them. There is also a poignant element within the narrative concerning the fundamentally different ways in which divine beings and mortal creatures experience the ramifications of their actions. For Hera, the punishment inflicted upon Echo was likely perceived as a relatively minor incident within the much grander, ongoing challenge of maintaining order, accountability, and fidelity in a vast world where her husband's capricious behavior created constant and widespread disruptions. The story strongly suggests that Hera possessed a crucial understanding of the intrinsic relationship between communication and truth. Well-intentioned conversations that consistently prevent individuals from confronting and addressing real, pressing problems are ultimately not truly helpful, even when they are momentarily enjoyable and offer temporary solace. But for Echo, the profound transformation was both complete and irrevocably permanent, affecting the very essence of every interaction she would ever have for the remainder of her existence. The narrative does not imply that Hera was inherently cruel or unjust. Rather, it powerfully underscores how actions that appear entirely reasonable and justifiable from one perspective can unleash devastating and life-altering consequences from another. The harsh punishment might indeed have imparted to Echo a valuable lesson regarding the critical distinction between conversation that genuinely serves the needs and well-being of others, and conversation that, however delightfully engaging, ultimately serves to avoid confronting difficult and uncomfortable truths. Yet, this profound lesson came at the irreparable cost of losing the very natural gift that had been central to her identity, her unique essence, and her fundamental way of relating to and interacting with the world around her. The very essence of an entity and its unique interaction with the world forms a profound subject of contemplation. Standing upon this venerable marble terrace, one might gaze upon the ancient landscapes where countless human sagas unfolded and ponder the contemporary dialogues that echo similar profound tensions. These often revolve around the delicate balance between extending kindness and upholding honesty, between shielding individuals from harsh realities and empowering them to confront necessary truths. Following the onset of her curse, Echo was compelled to cultivate entirely novel approaches to engage within the communal fabric of her society. The solace she once offered through expansive, meandering conversations or her insightful observations, which frequently illuminated familiar objects from fresh perspectives, was no longer available to her. Instead, she was obliged to forge meaning and foster connections by diligently listening and formulating thoughtful responses to the narratives shared by others. This narrative prompts a crucial inquiry. How does one judiciously weigh the inherent human desire to provide comfort and diversion against the imperative responsibility to champion authentic communication, even when the unvarnished truth may evoke discomfort for all parties involved? As the day draws to a close, the discussion can gracefully transition to an exploration of ancient Greek philosophies concerning youth and beauty, examining the profound reasons behind their establishment of formal rites and practices designed to celebrate and safeguard these inherently ephemeral qualities. Imagine oneself transposed to the courtyard of a gymnasium in classical Athens, perhaps during the illustrious 5th century BCE. The expanse of this facility would likely surpass initial expectations, constituting not merely a singular edifice, but an intricate complex encompassing dedicated zones for physical training, elaborate bathing chambers, serene gardens, and shaded porticos where citizens could convene for intellectual discourse and pedagogical instruction. The nascent morning light would softly permeate the canopy of olive trees strategically positioned along the courtyard's periphery, weaving an ever-changing tapestry of illumination and shadow across the pale, polished stone surfaces. One could discern the subtle, hushed symphony of daily preparations, the gentle cascade of water into basins, the soft, rhythmic scrape of strigils undergoing meticulous cleaning, and the low, resonant murmur of conversations as individuals gradually congregated for the day's impending activities. This was the hallowed ground where young Athenian men gathered, not solely for the cultivation of their physical prowess, but to partake in what modern sensibilities might term a cult of youth and aesthetic perfection. Though the Hellenes themselves would have employed distinct terminology and apprehended the custom in ways that could prove quite astonishing to us today. The daily regimen within the gymnasium meticulously mirrored this deeply ingrained understanding. Young men would typically arrive in the early hours and embark upon a preparatory phase characterized by an almost ritualistic exactitude. They would divest themselves of their quotidian garments and meticulously anoint their skin with olive oil, a practice rooted not in mere vanity, but in the practical necessity of shielding their bodies from the intense sun and abrasive winds during strenuous outdoor exercises. When the phrase "cult of youth and beauty" resonates in contemporary ears, it often conjures notions of superficiality or an obsessive preoccupation with outward appearance. However, the Greek philosophical stance was considerably more intricate and, in many respects, profoundly pragmatic. They perceived physical pulchritude and youthful vigor as tangible manifestations of more profound intrinsic virtues. Robust health, rigorous discipline, a harmonious equilibrium between the intellect and the corporeal form, and that particular brand of self-reverence stemming from a diligent self-care, akin to the meticulous tending of a precious garden. The very act of applying the olive oil functioned as a significant social ritual. Companions would assist one another in reaching less accessible areas of the body, and this shared process naturally fostered opportunities for hushed conversations about the day's forthcoming agenda, mutual concerns, or even the philosophical quandaries that might have arisen since their previous encounter. In this milieu, the meticulous physical care was intrinsically intertwined with profound emotional and intellectual communion. Subsequent to the oiling of their skin, the young men would dedicate a period to various forms of athletic endeavor. Sprinting, wrestling, the art of discus throwing, and javelin practice. Yet these activities were fundamentally not driven by a competitive ethos. The overarching objective was the cultivation of bodies that were inherently strong, remarkably flexible, and exquisitely graceful, capable of navigating the world with an innate sense of confidence and effortless ease. One might observe a particular cohort diligently practicing discus throwing in a secluded corner of the courtyard, Their attention is conspicuously diverted from metrics of distance or pinpoint accuracy. Instead, their focus is entirely engrossed in the inherent grace and fluidity of the throwing motion itself. They meticulously scrutinize the intricate rotation of the torso, the precise transference of weight from one foot to the other, and the seamless, elegant arc of the arm as it liberates the discus. Each subsequent throw is invariably followed by a collective discussion and gentle, constructive critique, with paramount emphasis placed on impeccable form and rhythmic execution rather than on quantifiable outcomes. This pervasive emphasis on elegant movement transcended the boundaries of formal athletic conditioning. The young men assiduously practiced the nuances of walking, sitting, and standing in manners that exuded an undeniable aura of self-assurance and composure. They were schooled in navigating diverse social milieus with the identical meticulous attention to form and inherent rhythm that they habitually applied to their athletic pursuits. The Greeks steadfastly believed that one's physical bearing profoundly influenced one's intellectual processes and emotional state. An individual who moved with innate grace and heightened self-awareness was deemed more likely to engage in clear thought and interact benevolently with others. Thus, physical discipline constituted a fundamental bedrock for comprehensive intellectual and moral maturation. Following their exercise, the elaborate bathing rituals commenced, forming an indispensable cornerstone of Greek conceptions of beauty and meticulous self-care. The initial phase involved the skillful deployment of strigils, distinctively curved metal implements employed to methodically scrape away oil, perspiration, and environmental impurities from the skin. This was far from a mere functional cleansing. It represented a sophisticated form of dermal care that left the body remarkably smooth and vibrantly healthy. The scraping procedure was habitually performed in pairs or small intimate groups, with friends diligently assisting one another in reaching challenging areas and ensuring the cleansing was both thorough and gentle. Much like the communal oil application, this practice cultivated opportunities for hushed conversation and reciprocal care, thereby significantly reinforcing social bonds. The culminating stage encompassed the delicate application of fragrant oils and, on occasion, subtle cosmetics. These were not intended to mask or radically alter one's inherent appearance, but rather to subtly enhance and reverently celebrate the natural pulchritude that had been meticulously unveiled through rigorous exercise and diligent cleansing. The ultimate aspiration was to embody the zenith of one's natural self, radiating robust health, vibrant vitality, and an unmistakable aura of being impeccably well cared for. Subsequent to the strigil cleansing, the bathing process continued with immersion in waters of varying temperatures, initially warm, then refreshingly cool, and occasionally culminating in a brief, invigorating plunge into cold water, which left the skin glowing with renewed energy. These sequential temperature shifts were widely believed to significantly improve circulatory function and bolster the body's innate capacity to adapt to fluctuating environmental conditions. Nevertheless, the overarching cult of youth and beauty extended far beyond these daily physical practices. The rigorous selection protocol for these esteemed ceremonial roles was approached with utmost solemnity, necessitating careful and sustained observation of potential candidates. Over time, the community sought not merely conventional physical attractiveness, but rather a constellation of deeper virtues, such as an intrinsic grace, profound emotional fortitude, and that authentic self-confidence which emanates from genuine self-respect, rather than mere vanity or unwarranted arrogance. Young men and women who conspicuously embodied the Hellenic ideals of aesthetic perfection and physical excellence might be chosen for participation in sacred religious processions, entrusted with the solemn duty of carrying hallowed objects, or selected to lead ceremonial dances. These distinguished roles serve to honor not merely individual allure, but more significantly, the community's collective reverence for the harmony and vibrant vitality that youth inherently symbolizes. Those individuals selected for these exalted positions profoundly understood that they were embodying something far grander than their individual selves. They functioned as living embodiments of the community's cherished values concerning health, disciplined conduct, and the appropriate, harmonious relationship between corporeal and spiritual development. Concurrently, the ancient Greeks possessed a profound awareness of the ephemeral nature of youth and physical beauty. Their celebrations of these esteemed qualities were invariably imbued with an underlying acknowledgement that the relentless march of time transforms all beings, and that the ultimate objective was not to desperately cling to a youthful visage, but rather to harness the inherent energy and self-assurance of youth to cultivate enduring qualities of character and profound wisdom. This nuanced understanding gave rise to practices that might appear rather unconventional to a modern observer. Older men, who in their prime had been celebrated for their beauty and youthful vigor, were subsequently honored for their pivotal role in guiding younger generations through the crucial transition from a reliance on physical attractiveness to the cultivation of deeper, more sustainable sources of self-confidence and meaningful social contribution. They firmly believed that an individual who had learned to appreciate and diligently care for their physical self during their formative years would be significantly better equipped to discover lasting wellsprings of satisfaction and self-respect as their corporeal form inevitably changed over the passage of time. The discipline and meticulous attention to health, painstakingly cultivated within the gymnasium, would therefore serve them steadfastly throughout their entire lives, even as their outward appearance underwent its natural evolution. Greek poetry and art from this illustrious period eloquently mirror this intricate comprehension of beauty and the aging process. Rather than perpetuating the illusion that youth endures perpetually, Greek artists celebrated the distinct, inherent beauty of each successive stage of life, the fresh, burgeoning energy of adolescence, the poised, mature confidence of middle age, and the dignified, profound wisdom characteristic of old age. The gymnasium, in its multifaceted role, served as an organic nexus where these vital intergenerational relationships could flourish spontaneously. Elder men would impart their accumulated knowledge of refined exercise techniques, meticulous personal care practices, and sophisticated social graces to their younger counterparts, while in turn, the younger men provided an invigorating surge of energy and boundless enthusiasm that kept the older men intimately connected to the enduring vitality of youth. As the evening descends and the gymnasium gradually yields to a serene quietude, one might observe how the gentle, late afternoon light casts a magnificent golden luminescence upon the skin of the young men completing their daily regimens. There is an undeniable intrinsic beauty emanating from bodies that have been meticulously nurtured and rigorously exercised, skin that is palpably healthy and immaculately clean, and movements that are imbued with an unmistakable confidence and innate grace. Movements that are confident and graceful, reflecting a deep-seated assurance in their physical presence and bearing. Perhaps the philosophical stance adopted by these ancient people offers profound insights for those of us grappling with our personal understanding of beauty. The inevitable progression of aging and the intricate dynamics of self-care. Instead of perceiving youth and aesthetic appeal as ephemeral blessings to desperately grasp onto, we might consider them as transient endowments to savor wholeheartedly while they are ours, serving as essential cornerstones upon which to cultivate rigorous self-discipline and profound personal esteem that can steadfastly accompany us throughout the extended odyssey of a complete and meaningful life. Yet an inherent tranquility also emanates from contemplating such aesthetic marvels, unburdened by the ceaseless apprehension of their perpetual maintenance. The Hellenic civilization appears to have discovered an ingenious method to extol corporeal excellence while simultaneously acknowledging its ephemeral character, enabling them to devote resources to robust well-being and outward presentation without succumbing to a frantic despair regarding the inevitable march of time and transformation. Picture, if you will, a leisurely stroll homeward amidst the twilight thoroughfares of classical Athens, enveloped by the soft, murmuring symphony of an urban landscape, gracefully yielding to the embrace of evening. One might be prompted to contemplate the profound experience of residing within a societal framework where aesthetic allure was lauded without any accompanying sense of culpability or reticence, where the passage of years was recognized devoid of any profound despondency, and where diligent corporeal attentiveness was perceived as an essential cornerstone for the enduring endeavor of evolving into one's most fully realized and magnanimous persona. What quotidian rituals or habitual disciplines could potentially assist in achieving that delicate equilibrium between revering the transient boons bestowed by one's early years and assiduously preparing for the distinct blessings that accrue from accumulated experience, profound sagacity, and the more profound aesthetic appeal that blossoms once the art of nurturing both one's own being and the welfare of fellow humans has been mastered throughout the entire chronological spectrum of an individual's existence. Thus, with the resonance of that subtly posed inquiry, one allows the venerable pronouncements of antiquity to dissolve into the placid quietude of the fading day, their profound yet unostentatious insights gently conveyed into the unconscious narratives that unfold during slumber, whatever form they may ultimately assume. The succinct two-word pronouncement, delivered with an unmistakable inflection, served as an immediate summons. It commenced with a sharp, almost reflexive "I," an interjection that could signify a sudden insight, a mild astonishment, or perhaps a simple call for attention, puncturing the prevailing silence. This initial, brief vocalization swiftly transitioned into the imperative "come," an unambiguous directive urging another individual to approach. The speaker, through this concise yet potent command, was evidently extending an invitation for proximity, perhaps to witness an unfolding spectacle, to partake in a burgeoning activity, or to share a discovery that demanded prompt observation. The brevity of the utterance, though minimal in its linguistic components, implied a scenario of potential importance, suggesting an imminent disclosure or a moment necessitating a shared presence, all communicated through the economy of these two spoken syllables.